ready, I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 11 of the Standing Committee on Science and Research. Pursuant to the motion of the House of 2025, the committee is meeting to study the private sector investment in research and development in Canada. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and also the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And with that, I welcome our three witnesses who are appearing before this committee for the first panel. We are joined by Ryan Williams, Fellow in Belsize School of International Affairs. We are also joined by Grace Lee Reynolds, Chief Executive Officer from Mars Discovery District. She is joining us by video conference. And we are also joined by Bruce Johnson, Executive Vice President, Mighty Innovation Development. Welcome to all the witnesses. All of you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and then we will go to the round of questioning with our members of parliament. With that, we will start with our witnesses. So, Mr. Williams, you can please start. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm here today with a clear proposal. Canada must double business R&D investment by 2030, and here's how we can do it. Now, mind you, this is in order, and it has to be in this order or it doesn't work. Assert our sovereignty, establish venture capital, and be relentlessly competitive. Canada's digital economy is exploding. AI startups, fintech, e-commerce, data centers, and cloud services now drive over $100 billion a year, bigger than agriculture, bigger than forestry. But here's the problem. We have almost no protection for it, no unified law, no shield, and we increasingly and recklessly give our ideas, our IP, and our digital sovereignty away. We spend over $10 billion a year in public research funding, yet only 12% of patents in Canada come from Canadians. Over 87% of our innovation is foreign-owned. Worse, only about 5% of patents generated at Canadian universities ever become licensed, meaning roughly 95% of publicly funded research lies dormant in the valley of death. That translates to a loss of roughly 2.7% of GDP, about $75 billion annually, and $5 billion in tax revenue. In Q1 2025, U.S. startups raised $91.5 billion USD in venture funding. Canadian startups raised only $920 million US dollars, a 100-fold gap. But guess what? Only 20% of that funding was Canadian. You guessed it, U.S. VC firms funded 80% of our Canadian startups. And why does that matter? Well, roughly 0.2% of startups in the U.S. are VC-backed, but VC-backed firms have gone on to constitute about 42% of all U.S. IPOs and 62% of public R&D spending through private firms. And that is why we need to get our sovereignty right. Since 2016, Ottawa, for instance, has invested over $4.4 billion in AI and digital research. Yet roughly 75% of the resulting patents and IP are owned abroad, mostly by U.S. and Chinese companies. That means $3.3 billion of taxpayer-funded innovation is fueling foreign companies, not Canada's. When multiplied by IP's economic effect, that's $15 to $30 billion in lost output every year. We are literally funding the future for someone else, and we need to get back control of it. Meanwhile, 80% of Canada's digital data is owned and hosted on U.S.-controlled servers. Under the U.S. Cloud Act, American authorities can compel access to Canadian data stored on U.S. infrastructure, and this is infrastructure located in Toronto or Montreal, by the way, with no equivalent Canadian blocking statute. If Canada continues to rely on U.S. servers, U.S. venture funding, and U.S. ownership of our innovations, we will enter every future trade agreement as a price taker, not a partner. Increasingly, the next NAFTA will be about AI, data, and digital sovereignty, and right now, we're negotiating from weakness. Meanwhile, our peers treat innovation as a strategic resource. The U.S. uses the CHIPS Acts and DARPA and SBIR to keep IP at home. Israel's Yanza Fund co-invests public capital to anchor startups domestically. This is not about also research, it's also about market structure. We don't have much competition in Canada. We have what's called a monopoly problem. And Canada's most concentrated sectors in banking and digital economy invest less than 0.5% of their revenue in R&D, compared to 2% when there's more competition in the U.S. When markets are closed, innovation dies. Competition itself is an innovation policy. My three core recommendations are as follows. Number one, enact a Canadian Innovation and Data Sovereignty Act. Protect Canadian IP and data like we protect critical minerals and energy. Require every publicly funded research project to include a Canadian commercialization plan. Require a Canadian data residency for sensitive industries to counter the U.S. Cloud Act. And make sure that right now, when Canadian privacy and data is held on U.S. servers in Canada, that they don't fall under U.S. courts and U.S. jurisdiction. And implement export controls for AI, quantum, biotech, and defense tech. Two, establish a $100 billion sovereign innovation fund, a co-investment vehicle matching private VC 50-50 through repayable loans, not grants. Take small 1% to 2% equity shares in IP-heavy Canadian firms so taxpayers share the upside. And step in when foreign buyers threaten to remove critical Canadian IP, giving founders a Canadian alternative to selling out. And three, break up monopolies and incentivize competition R&D. Rewrite the Competition Act to make innovation and R&D explicit priorities. Enforce market share caps and require divestitures when there's data when it's less than 40%. And ban killer acquisitions that eliminate Canadian startups. Too many of our Canadian startups get bought up by American VCs. Canada's already proven it can defend sovereignty when it matters. As Jim Basile warned, you can't commercialize what we don't own, and Canada doesn't own much. It's time to act with the same resolve to ensure that when something is invented in Canada, it's also owned in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Ms. Reynolds. She's joining us by video conference. Ms. Reynolds, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting Mars to speak on this critical issue today. Canada has no shortage of ideas or talent. The challenge we face is ensuring that discoveries make their way into markets quickly and at scale. And the data is sobering. Canada has fallen to 18th in the OECD's productivity rankings, behind Norway, the US, France, the UK, and Australia. We spend just 2% of GDP on R&D, while Sweden spends 4% and South Korea 5%. The OECD data is clear. We need well-targeted R&D support and a stronger emphasis on the commercialization of innovation. And here's what's concerning. Half of Canadian founders who raise more than $1 million do so in the US. Those who go south raise nearly twice as much as their peers who stay in Canada. We're not only losing capital, but often the future anchor firms that drive R&D and create high-quality jobs. And so after a decade at Mars and years working at the intersection of research, entrepreneurship, and industry, I've seen firsthand that this isn't about a lack of talent or breakthrough science. It's about system design. But the good news is that the design can be changed. And I'll touch on 3 areas where we believe targeted action could make a real difference. So first, let's fix the capital problem. We need to attract more domestic investment into our scaling firms. The Canadian investment sector has been cautious at early stages, especially when technologies are unproven. But that can change if early stage ventures can be de-risked through business mentorship, talent development, and crucially, access to customers, particularly in regulated industries. And government can play an important role here. When the government acts as a first customer through strategic procurement, it validates technology and it de-risks it for private investors. So we have tools like Innovation Solutions Canada, but using them at a greater scale would strengthen our domestic investment base. Second, let's accelerate university-industry collaboration. Our universities produce world-class research, but translating that excellence into commercial outcomes remains difficult. We can expand programs like MyTax and NSERC that create direct partnerships between researchers and industry. Equally important is simplifying how intellectual property moves from lab to market. Making technology transfer offices accessible and involving industry partners earlier would help ensure more research is guided towards the market needs from the start. And while universities drive discovery, commercialization often requires complementary infrastructure. Organizations that can connect ventures with capital, customers, and talent. And strengthening this ecosystem around our research institutions would make it easier for Canadian ideas to become Canadian companies. Third recommendation, let's retain value in Canada. We fund early stage research, but we lose momentum when companies need to scale. For IP developed with public funding, especially in high growth areas like AI, clean tech and energy, and life sciences, we need strategies to ensure more of that value and job creation stays here in Canada. And again, strategic procurement by government and established corporations can be a powerful lever in this effort. So when government or corporates buy Canadian innovation, it sends a powerful signal to global markets. So as you can see, resolving the gap around R&D commercialization is multifaceted. It requires clear policy direction, a shift in risk appetite, efficient capital deployment, and also effective use of tax systems. With ISED, provinces, regional development agencies, and superclusters all holding a piece of this mandate, what we need is strategic coordination across the system. Budget 2022 proposed a new innovation agency, but its status is unclear. But whether through a new agency or better coordination of existing ones, what matters is speed, risk tolerance, and action, connecting researchers, capital, and customers. So in closing, Mars has spent 25 years as a hub connecting entrepreneurs, researchers, customers, and capital. The entrepreneurs we work with consistently tell us they need capital that matches the scale of their ambition, access to customers who will take a chance on Canadian innovation, and IP frameworks that protect their inventions while enabling commercialization. So there is good news. The good news is we have already so many of the pieces. We have world-class research. We have entrepreneurial talent. The urgent challenge is to use these tools differently with greater speed, coordination, more risk tolerance, and a focus on outcomes, especially in light of our shifting global markets. And if we can get this right, we won't just fund innovation, we'll build companies, industry, and jobs that define Canada's future.
Done.
We are done. I am done. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now go to Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Please go ahead.
I'm Bruce Johnson. I'm with Martin Rea International. We're a Canadian-based manufacturer and supplier to the automotive and industrial markets. We currently employ more than 19,000 talented and motivated people. We operate in 57 locations in 10 countries. Martin Rea's vision is making lives better by being the best supplier we can be in the products we make and the services we provide. Who am I? I'm a proud Canadian, 42 years in the automotive manufacturing business based in Canada. I'm in my 19th year at Martin Rea, and I'm currently responsible for Martin Rea Innovation Development, an innovation incubator and developer. We support innovation within Martin Rea, and we invest in innovative companies that are developing innovative technologies. One of those investments was Afenco, and I'll refer to Afenco in my examples today. Afenco is a Quebec-based company that develops electrification solutions for large vocational trucks. Martin Rea Innovation Development purchased the assets out of bankruptcy 3 years ago, and we have now created a growing and operating business with continued engineering and development in Quebec and manufacturing in Ontario. First, a general perspective on innovation. At Martin Rea, our view is that innovation requires that 3 things be accomplished. First, we must establish proof of concept. Second, we have to industrialize the product. And third, we have to commercialize the product. Internally, Martin Rea is a successful innovator. We draw on our skills and experience to drive innovation. Externally, Martin Rea has worked extensively with early to mid-stage companies and small to medium enterprises. These companies, with help, can typically achieve proof of concept. Where they struggle most is with industrialization and commercialization, both keys to building a business. It's a tough thing to build a business. There is a very strong case that can be made that Canadian companies, when working in collaboration with a combination of other companies, educational institutions, innovation hubs, and governments, will significantly de-risk projects and increase the quality of outcomes. Both private and public resources are better placed with strong teams that can play to the partners' strengths. Martin Rea works closely with a number of educational institutions, agencies, and initiatives such as NRCan, NGen, OVEN, IVI, MARS, and others. We recommend that the best direction is to apply resources to the teams that are most likely to win. As for barriers, capital intensity and the capital intensity of R&D projects. As an example from Afenco, the development of a zero-emission system requires substantial upfront investment commitment, in this case, more than $17 million, with a long development cycle of 4 to 5 years. This extended timeline and capital intensity makes it challenging to attract private investment due to delayed return on investment and inherent technical risks. What we recommend is a dual approach to de-risk innovation investment and accelerate commercialization. Combine strong public grant support with enhanced tax-based incentives, including repayable tax credit, regardless of short-term financial performance, to improve short-term liquidity. Strengthening public-private co-investment through entities like BDC allows governments to fund and match private capital based on clearly established milestones. Another barrier, grant availability and processing time. Again, an example for Afenco. Accessing government funding for R&D is important, but often constrained by grant availability and processing timelines. These programs are typically highly competitive and strict eligibility criteria and long review cycles that can delay project milestones. As a recommendation, facilitate private and public sector partnerships, introduce rolling intake for high-impact projects in emerging industries and technologies, advocate for grant partnership with universities and public research institutes as part of the grant evaluation criteria, create dedicated funding streams within existing programs to support capital-intensive technology development, adapt eligibility criteria for both small to medium enterprises and large corporations, ensuring rapid access to capital in alignment with development and commercialization cycles. Another barrier is ownership and control of intellectual property, another Afenco example. During collaboration discussions, concerns emerged regarding the potential deployment of jointly developed IP by public research institutes and universities in unrelated projects with other organizations. Such deployment risks undermine the proprietary nature of the Afenco technology, compromising Canadian innovation and competitive advantage. We recommend standardizing an IP protection framework for publicly funded programs that prioritize the protection of Canadian innovation and commercial interests. Also consider IP mitigation plans as part of grant applications. Finally, Canada has much to celebrate with respect to the high quality of our talent. We believe that these recommendations will help further unlock that talent. We believe that resources are best placed with teams that exhibit a strong mix of capabilities through proof of concept, industrialization, and commercialization. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all the witnesses for their opening testimonies. Now we will proceed to the first round of questioning, and we will start with MP Baldinelli for 6 minutes. Please go ahead. You will have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. I'm going to begin by going to Mr. Williams. It's good to see you. I know this area has been a passion of yours, and we've spoken many times about it. You've even been a member of this very committee raising the issues we're studying today, so thank you for that. In some of your other writings on this issue, you've indicated that Canada faces an innovation paradox. You know, we excel at generating ideas but fail to own or commercialize them. Ms. Reynolds, you even said Canada has no shortage of talent or ideas. Yet, you know, we're spending over $10 billion in public research funding, yet economic outcomes increasingly are benefiting others. And you showed that only 12% of patents filed in Canada come from Canadians. Over 87% of innovation is foreign-owned. And I wrote these comments down. You said, we are literally funding the future of someone else. So if Canada's losing about $75 billion a year in GDP from foreign IP ownership, you know, what concrete steps can the government take right now to stop that loss?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, it's a pleasure to be back here at committee. In some ways it's changed, some ways it hasn't changed. But, you know, you're absolutely right. When we studied the first instance of IP commercialization, we identified that a lot of our IP gets siphoned out of Canada, and that's a major problem. Not only is it costing jobs, not only is it costing our GDP, it's stopping us from really utilizing the talents we have in Canada. And number one on that is we have some great world-class institutions here. The U15, you're going to have Robert Asseline come and present at the next panel. But we have unbelievable universities that do some unbelievable research. The problem is we give it all away. So the number one step that we have to do is establish sovereignty in Canada, where we protect the IP that's generated in Canada and ensure that when we spend money, especially $10 billion a year on research, that it doesn't go to other foreign nations. We don't allow that with critical minerals. We certainly don't allow that with our energy sector. So why are we allowing it with our data sector? So the number one, what I've said before anything else, and this has to be in order, before we establish VC funding, before that we tackle competition, which I'm always in favor of, number one is to establish our sovereignty. And that's by doing two things. One, it's establishing an act that ensures that when we're spending money in IP, that every attempt possible is to commercialize that IP here in Canada. And number two, the biggest one I brought up was the U.S. Cloud Act in the U.S. So not a lot of Canadians know, not a lot of parliamentarians know that 80% of the data that Canadians utilize, so that's health data, financial data, data in terms of speaking to ChatGPT every day, is held on servers in Canada, but it's owned by the Americans, and they have jurisdiction on that data. In other words, they can be tried under U.S. courts on data held in Toronto on a server because it's held by a U.S. cloud, and that's a problem we have to solve right away. In 1960s, we had what was called the Helms-Barton Act, which when the U.S. were at that time trying to make sure that Canada at that point wasn't allowed to invest in Cuba, we had an act that countered that called the Foreign Extraterritorial Measures Act. And that countered the act so that when, for instance, there were companies that were investing in Cuba, they weren't held under U.S. law. We have to do the same, either to update the Foreign Extraterritorial Measures Act here in Canada or come up with our own legislation that guarantees that Canadian data on U.S. servers doesn't fall under U.S. jurisdiction or under their court system, which is happening right now.
Thank you for that. And what countries are doing it right then? I mean, from retaining IP, protecting data, and scaling innovation. And, and what can Canada learn from some of these countries? I believe, Ms. Reynolds, you mentioned about Sweden and what they're providing in terms of investment dollars comparison to Canada. Canada ranking, I think, as low as 18 in the OECD. So what are some of the other countries doing, and what can we utilize or replicate from them?
The U.S. certainly is leading the pack. They're leading the world with some of their biggest companies in innovation, but they're using the CHIPS Act, so that's the newest act that's to establish primarily their sovereignty when it comes to chips, to try to pull some of that, the microprocessor and chips technology away from Taiwan. Secondly, they have DARPA, and I know that our industry minister in the past has tried to bring forth a CARPA to counter that, but it's really about what it comes down to is procurement. It's that the Canadian government is dedicated to helping companies with their research, but then committing to buying that technology off the shelf from those companies. And we're not doing that. The U.S. has done it for over 30 years with DARPA. And the third thing they're doing in the U.S. is the SBIR, the Small Business Innovation and Research. So they invest primarily in small businesses and their research, and again, committing to commercialize their products or buy their products once they've reached a certain level. And we're not doing any of those here in Canada.
Ms. Reynolds, you had talked about earlier on your third point about retaining value in Canada, about a strategy to make it stay here, our investments, and the need for strategic coordination across all levels. Is the system too bureaucratic right now? Are there too many rules in place, too many players involved? And how can we simplify that ecosystem to get that value-added system created in Canada?
That's a really fantastic question. I think it's an important starting point. I think to all of your points, is it too bureaucratic? Yes, there's probably lots of elements of that. Is it, are there too many players? There are a lot of players involved.
If you could provide a written response.
Or maybe you can ask.
Okay.
MP Noor Mohammed, you will have 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. And Ryan, it's great to see you in committee and actually very much in your element. And it was really wonderful to hear your testimony, but also sobering on a number of fronts. One of the things that I wanted to lean in on is, and you and I have talked about this before, the complexity of raising capital for early stage in this country. And ironically, as you grow, the complexity of raising larger rounds of capital. So, I was really intrigued by this question of a sovereign innovation fund. I've been talking a lot about a sovereign wealth fund that focused on innovation for quite some time. One of the things that I'd love your thoughts on is obviously a lot of programs right now, historically across governments, have been what governments have called investments, when in fact they're not equity positions. With this new approach that you're suggesting, do you think it is time for government now to start taking, through a government fund, even if it's arm's length, which it should be, to take equity positions in some of these new Canadian innovative companies?
Yes, and nice to see you again as well through the chair. 100%. I think if this is taxpayer funding, this is public dollars, and like I mentioned earlier, if we gave $4.4 billion to AI technology, of which 75% of that is foreign owned, we were giving that money effectively to foreign corporations in foreign countries. We want to be investing in Canadian companies, and in that, if we're spending public dollars, we should be then making sure that the government also has a stake. And what that do is two things. Number one, it is unique. Not a lot of even the Israel's Yasma fund, they do not take equity, but it makes sure it protects the dollars. And my idea on this is it follows venture capital private investment. So the government would not put money in unless we already had private investment, so 50-50 into companies. So that protects those private investors who are already taking an equity share, but it also protects the taxpayer. And what that really does at the end of the day is hopefully it'll raise more money. As there's going to be startups that fail. This is how the ecosystem works. But those companies that do well will return that investment back to the taxpayer. And then what that does is it allows perpetuity, that we have more money that goes into Canadian startups, and away we go.
And just on that, I mean, obviously there are examples like Norgea and Temasek where they are taking, through their sovereign wealth funds, they are taking positions in tech companies. So it's not like we'd be the only ones doing this, which I think is, I think should make things easier for what I think has historically been a risk-averse investment environment in Canada. Obviously, one of the challenges has been getting that early stage investor, getting those early stage investors in Canada to invest, right? Ironically, we seem very easy to invest when it comes to mining and taking a flyer on resource development. What do we need to do as a country? This isn't just about government. What do we need to, as a country? I'm going to go first, Ryan, to you, and then to Grace, Ms. Reynolds, if you would, please. To unlock the way in which VCs in this country start to see investments in Canada. I mean, obviously, we know that valuations in Canada tend to be lower than the U.S. There's better deals to be had right now in Canada. How do we get the VC environment here to actually start playing more aggressively in the Canadian sandbox?
There you go. Well, I think there's two ways. Number one, we have to ensure that IP wants to stay in Canada, and that's why we made the sovereign changes. The sovereignty has to be number one. If we don't make it attractive, if we don't set rules that IP has to stay in Canada, it's just going to go. When we look at other nations, especially the Americans, they have lower tax rates. They shouldn't have lower capital gains. Many companies are going to Texas or Florida because they're seeing zero state taxes there. But number one is it has to be when we see investments in Canada, there's a saying that says capital goes where capital grows. We have to make sure that we are relentlessly competitive and that we have the attractiveness in tax policies and government policies, and then for the investors, that when they're investing money in Canada, it's just as competitive as it is in the U.S.
Sounds great. Ms. Reynolds, same question.
Thank you. I could probably offer an example of that because it's difficult, indeed, to have private, even venture capital, who wants to invest at an earlier stage, take that initial risk. We have a program that's been running in partnership with the Ontario government since about 2008. It's called the Mars Investment Accelerator Fund, and its very role is actually to be an intervention to help fund that first check for emerging technologies. And the success of the fund is not really measured through, say, the return directly, although it has been quite successful. It operates independent of government as a venture fund, kind of overall under our oversight. However, the main victory is actually around kind of the follow-on investment that it can attract over the years. So it's been able to, over these years, attract an over 2.7 times investment follow-on criteria. And that's really, if you think about that as a mechanism, as an intervention to be able to kind of help those early stage companies with that very first opportunity. I mean, that is a good example. You know, we wish there were more examples of an investment accelerator fund. And just to add, in this particular case, you know, it was we'll call it focused on the software sector, so those early checks were easier, kind of anywhere ranging from 500,000 to 1.5 million. But if we're really talking about deeper commercialization, that type of early stage risk and investment needs to be a higher check size. If you're looking at an early stage biotech company, it's like 2 to 10 million that's needed. It is an area then, I would say there's a great opportunity for the government to be able to help with that early stage risk.
And with my remaining time, Madam Chair, how much time do I have left?
You're done.
I'm done. Okay.
3 seconds.
All right. Well, thank you both.
Over.
Thank you both, all of you. Thank you.
So we will now proceed to Mr. MP Blanchet-Jonca. Please go ahead. You will have 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les...
Thank you, Chair. And good morning to the witnesses. Thank you for being with us for this new study. The first question is with Mr. Williams in support for marketing IP. In a report our committee published in 2023 and a research note from the Library of Parliament, which we received in October 2025, they make the same note that Canada is the only country, one of the few G7 countries where private research and development investment is decreasing. Why has our federal government not been able to rectify this innovation deficit in spite of the creation of the Canadian Innovation Corporation and the Strategic Innovation Fund?
Mr. Blanchet.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blanchet-Jonca.
So we did complete a study. This committee was one of the first studies on this committee that looked at IP commercialization, and we specifically looked at public research. We looked at both universities, and we all looked at polytechnics and colleges, and we saw the return on that. Now, the stat we may not have had in that report that we've gotten since and we use, only 5% of patents that all the research that goes into universities, only 5% of those patents get commercialized. Now, that's a low stat. And when we looked at the alternative and that report, one of the recommendations came out was to look at the colleges and polytechnics, because the colleges and polytechnics were much higher than 5%. And the reason they were higher than 5% is they were engaged with small businesses themselves. They engaged with their IP. They helped them scale and accelerate that IP. Then they gave it back to those businesses. They didn't own the IP. They allowed them to grow. We have to get back to that. We have to, and of those recommendations, as far as I've seen so far, and we haven't seen the budget come out yet, but that hasn't been a reality in terms of the government changing how it looks at innovation and how it funds either our public institutions, including our colleges and polytechnics.
Returning to the 2023 report, again from the Science and Research Committee, which formulated 14 recommendations in their report on supporting the marketing of intellectual property to improve the value placed on Canadian research. 2 years later, no update nor a public follow-up has been published. Would you say that the government is suffering from a deficit of innovation or a deficit of implementation?
Certainly both. You know, I think we have to get serious on this. So when we look at what the reality of innovation means for Canada, it's Canada's fastest growing export. We look at data and we look at technology and the whole, it's now sitting at 10% of our exports. It's grown 4 times as fast as our goods sectors. And what's leading that is obviously cloud services, computer services. You know, when we look at AI as a whole, quantum computing, which Canada still has quite a bit of the AI in. And if we're not serious on that, when we talk about sovereignty, looking at Canada's sovereignty, where that's actually benefiting, who it's benefiting are the Chinese and the Americans. So I think we're going to find in short order, as we are now, looking at slowdowns of the economy, looking at the trade war we have with the Americans, if we're not serious on owning our sovereignty with IP, with data as a whole, we're going to lose all of that, and we're going to be in a big mess of trouble. We're going to be playing catch up. So I think for this government, it needs to be first priority to establish our sovereignty and also to grow our innovation sectors.
I'll continue on the subject of sovereignty. You mentioned 80% of Canadian digital data are housed in American servers. it's easy to understand that that's unacceptable. By leaving that dependency and by allowing it to set in, is that they don't understand the country's digital sovereignty and that of Quebec, where the most advanced research in AI and cybersecurity occurs, and yet the federal government is investing in its super hub of the economy and identified Montreal as a strategic AI point, but is not able to trust in the actual infrastructures that they're investing in.
Have to get this right. And this is something I don't think a lot of Canadians understand the severity of this, that we do not have sovereignty on data. So Quebecers who have their data stored in a Montreal server are under the jurisdiction of U.S. sovereignty and privacy laws. When we were studying, of course, in last Parliament, C-27 and updating PIPEDA and the Privacy Act, we looked at Quebec as having provincially the best privacy laws in Canada. Now, for Quebecers to understand that their data is under the jurisdiction of U.S. law, under the U.S. Cloud Act, that would be very concerning for Quebecers. The government either has to update the Extraterritorial Measures Act or come up with its own Sovereignty Act that I've identified, and to ensure right away that we are putting the sovereignty of Quebecer and Canadians' data back in their own hands and not to the U.S. and U.S. courts and potential lawsuits from the U.S. courts.
Mr. Williams, si nous ne possédons pas nos brevets, nos données, nos
Mr. Williams, if we don't own our own patents and data, can we talk about scientific sovereignty, or have we simply become a technological subsidiary of the USA?
Well, the USA, but also China and other nations that are investing in Canada and owning the rights to our data. So again, going back to what's most important, I hope out of a recommendation in this report, is to establish our digital sovereignty now, not in the next Parliament, not in 8 months, but right now, to establish that we get control of our IP, that we understand the sieve that Canada has become in letting our ideas and public dollars flow out of the country, and to ensure that once we do that, then we can start building our IP, start building our wealth and our potential here in this country.
We will now proceed with our second round, and we will start that with MP De Ryder. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Hi, Ryan. Welcome. I'm going to start with you. In one of your papers and today, you referenced Jim Balsillie, who warned you can't commercialize what you don't own, and Canada doesn't own much. A reality underscored by your paper's findings that over 87% of Canada's innovation and foreign-owned, driven by liberal policies such as high taxes, regulatory burdens, and a failure to protect publicly funded IP, leaving Canada once again last in the G7 for R&D investment and commercialization. Where global competition, innovation, and technology, especially in Kitchener Centre, where I'm from, is critical as it's now one of our largest impacts economically, do you agree that the government's policy failures have severely undermined Canada's ability to compete globally? And what can we do to reverse course?
Thank you very much. And I certainly do. I think, Canada is not living up to its potential. Certainly when we're giving away our IP willingly, we're losing jobs, we're losing on GDP, we're losing on wealth for Canadians and for Canada as a whole. And let's be honest, this is a great country. We want to have world-class talent here, and we do. We have some great companies that are in Canada, but certainly the reality, the numbers that are there point a different story, and they're certainly fixable. The government can change this, and that's by changing our sovereignty. I'm going to give you one example. I gave the $4.4 billion that we've spent on AI, of which 75% is foreign-owned, but we also spend a lot of money with battery research, and one of those is Tesla. And in Dalhousie University, the provincial and federal governments have both given money for research to that university, but few Canadians understand that in that example for Tesla, 100% of that IP in Dalhousie goes to Dartmouth, which is a partnership they have, and it goes back to Tesla. So we hold none of that research in that university. And one other example was we had an Ontario company that we gave $2 million to called Hibar. It was also bought from Tesla and taken out of the country. So again, back to my recommendation, we have to establish sovereignty, that if we have public funds going into IP and research in Canada, we must make the best attempts to hold the IP in Canada, make sure that it's really hard to remove that IP, and third, that when we have that commercialization, that goes to Canadian companies, or we retain a portion of that IP.
Thank you. I agree that we have amazing companies here in Canada, especially in Kitchener Centre, where I'm from. I proudly declare us Canada's innovation capital because of all of our innovation and technology coming from there. I just want to quickly mention the $4.4 billion again in AI investment, but 75% of that is now gone overbroad to companies not here in Canada. So our public tax dollars are funding, as you said, the futures of someone else. What specific competition-focused policies could reverse liberal oversight, incentivize private investment, and prevent IP leakage to ensure our youth that are driving our innovation, as well as our next workforce, have a bright future here in Canada?
Well, I appreciate the question. Thank you. And this is why I included in it. Why is competition in IP and data sovereignty? Well, it's because competition in Canada is stopping research and development. When we look at companies in the U.S., when you look at the revenues and what percentage of their revenues are they spending on R&D, it's 2%. And in Canada, especially with banking and with financial services and digital technology, it's only 0.5%. And why? Well, because there's no competition. When companies are under the guise of competition or they have competitors, they're going to spend more to outcompete because they have that pressure. And in Canada, we don't have it. And the example I've pushed really hard for here in Parliament is open banking. We have 5 financial institutions or banks in Canada that control 85% of the banking assets in Canada. But if we enact open banking and allow Canadians to have financial freedom and able to move from one bank to another, we're going to unleash fintechs, financial tech organizations in Canada. We're going to allow innovation as a whole. We're going to move that 0.5% to 2% in Canada, which is alone going to transfer a tremendous amount of IP and R&D into Canadian hands because it's Canadian institutions. And guess what? Because there's 4,000 banks in America and there's only 6 in Canada, when open banking will be enacted in Canada where it's not also all the way enacted in the U.S., we're going to be able to attract some of that investment here in Canada as well.
Thank you very much. You also...
15 seconds left.
Okay, I'm just going to very quickly ask. Your paper also says that there's barriers to venture capitalism. So I agree that we're very good at educating and incubating, but then our venture capitalism is not here in Canada. You'll have to probably write this answer. I'd like to know what policies need to be reversed, specifically tax policies, to drive venture capitalism here in Canada.
Thank you. Time is up. Now we will proceed to MP Jessic for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. You've certainly, each of you, emphasized the complexity of bringing product to market, to commercialization, and all the various inputs that are necessary. I'll start with my first question to Ms. Reynolds. You mentioned BDC in your presentation. What do you see as the role of BDC in terms of potentially insisting that any loans, financing that they offer result in a product remaining in Canada? Is there any way to do that? In any way alluded to in any experience that you've had with BDC?
Not specifically. I won't comment necessarily specifically on BDC, but perhaps I guess the question about retaining, right? Making sure, how do we ensure and retain? I think, and this was alluded to earlier, it's really hard work for founders and entrepreneurs, right? To bring their business about. And so I do think if we're looking at if the idea is to create more sovereignty around this, it's got to be easier for them. And so with that, it means more access to early stage capital, right? More access then, and you may get your first loan from BDC, right? But if you want that IP and you want your business to stay and grow from Canada, what else is needed? That next source of venture capital needs to also be part of Canada. I was in a presentation this morning that talks about how companies here, it is just so hard to raise that next round of capital. They don't want to go to the US, but the US, there is a lot of capital in the US. And as soon as that comes in, you end up having US leaders then on your board as well, right? So that's got to shift in terms from a capital perspective. It's hard to mandate that IP stays in Canada if the money doesn't kind of actually come from within Canada. And I'll probably run out of time quickly, but the flip side of that too is critical. What's critical? It's one thing to fund a company, but the company needs customers, right? That's how companies will grow and thrive. And what can we do here in Canada to help be that first customer for many of these emerging technologies, right? What we want them to do is stay in Canada and then be able to seek global customers, of course, but getting those first set of customers, and if we want them to stick in Canada, that's something I feel that we can do, and in particular, government through procurement.
So, Mr. Williams, welcome back. A similar question. How do you see actually mandating that Canadian products invested somehow through a Canadian banking system, loan system, how do you actually mandate retaining that ownership and product within Canada?
So that's where, so I'm going to speak to two parts. One, you mentioned the BDC, and the biggest issue I have with the BDC is they're not mandated to compete against the big banks. So they're not a competitor. They see themselves as complementary. And of course, they do have investment funds, but they are really risk adverse. They don't really like to take a lot of risks. So the BDC has to be riskier when it's looking at early investment. The second part is, again, going back to sovereignty. We have to have rules that change that if again, we have Canadian IP and innovation. And our advantage in Canada is we do spend $10 billion a year on research. Half of that goes to, you'll have Mr. Asseline in the next round from the U15, and then half of that goes into some of the AI technology announcements we make, the research granting councils and otherwise. But we have to have rules that protects that IP in Canada, because investors in Canada will not invest in something that they're not going to own or is going to be bought out. And that's exactly what's happening in Canada. So the sovereignty piece is so very important. We have to get sovereignty right. We have to ensure measures or vessels like the BDC are relentlessly competitive. They compete with the big banks. And then, the second recommendation I gave is for the government to create a new entity that matches venture capital funding. Venture capital, again, 0.2% of companies get venture capital in the U.S., but it constitutes 42% of all the R&D in private companies. That is outstanding. It's astounding. We have to mirror some of that in Canada, and that means the government not taking risks themselves. They're matching venture capitalists themselves. They're matching private investment. The government should, by the way, never be picking winners and losers. It should be private investors, and we make it easier for them to do business here in Canada.
There is something, I believe, within the Ministry of Industry, a strategic innovation fund. Is that a potential vehicle for this matching to venture capital? Are you aware of that at all?
Yeah, So SIF funding, the Strategic Innovation Fund, right now it matches when the government, for instance, put $40 billion towards battery plants. SIF is part of that. Part of it goes through SIF. The other goes through the other channels on which we're doing innovation funding. Again, the problem with SIF a lot of times is the government is choosing those winners. And we've seen it in the past with vaccine procurement. So Medicago, Novavax, all of which when we were in Parliament and those initiatives failed, we found that we didn't own any of that IP. And the problem, again, was government writing contracts or putting money or public dollars without having private backing to that. So I think we have to follow markets. Number one, follow markets and ensure that the government's role is to follow private financing, and we want to encourage more of it, but also to set the tax rules so it's more advantageous for those companies to exist and to invest in Canada.
Thank you. Time is up. We will proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonker. Please go ahead. You will have 2.5 minutes.
Monsieur Williams, vous avez reconnu...
Mr. Williams, you acknowledge that Quebec has the best data protection laws in the country under Luc Sirois, the Chief of Innovation, and this involves our whole innovation ecosystem, digital, and we have innovation not only in languages and values, but also our research and innovation and marketing ecosystem with the transformation of university research into exploitable IP. Synchronex, the Cornelius College Technology Transfer Centers, and in particular, those centers accompany our SMEs in innovation. We have our transfer of research and regional entrepreneurship. And in your opinion, is a model like this that is decentralized, relying on a legislative framework that is solid and consistent, would be more effective than the federal one to enhance IP and private research and innovation?
About is obviously provincial versus federal legislation and jurisdiction. And obviously, you know, one of the reasons we have any type of open banking, for instance, at all is only because of the provinces, because of provincial legislation through the privacy acts on the provinces, which has allowed them to operate in a certain framework. But unfortunately, the federal government still, for this country, still has the jurisdiction over the large swaths, over the any data sovereignty, any trade agreements as a whole, certainly over federal budgets. So it has to be a federal government who establishes a privacy act as a whole. We have to get C27 in some form back. You know, I think I haven't heard that come out yet, but so I have not seen that as a priority of this government. But we have to have privacy legislation that comes into the modern age and includes data sovereignty, which does not exist in any part of legislation right now. And certainly, when I go back to Quebec, Quebec does have some great examples and best practices, and is certainly the best privacy legislation to date. We need to work with Quebec and get that legislation to the floor federally right now in order to protect Quebec and Canada.
D'autres choses pour conclure?
Thank you. Anything else to conclude? 20 seconds. Anything essential that we should keep in mind in this study to take action?
When you look to the final study and recommendations, make sure they're recommendations that go to Parliament as soon as possible. They're not recommendations that are 5 years away. I think this is so pertinent and so important right now that we need to have recommendations that go to Parliament now. I would recommend all members of this committee, because of the nature of trade agreements, the nature of the data economy as a whole, that they make these recommendations to be forthwith, not something that we need in 5 years, that we need by the end of the year. And my recommendations were to have that double that bird investment by 2030.
Thank you. And we will now proceed to MP Cody for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are for Mr. Williams. I want to thank you for coming here today. Your testimony, as well as all the witnesses, have given us a lot to consider. You made reference of Canada being a valley of death for IP commercialization and Canada facing an innovation paradox. And I was hoping that you might be able to expand on the role Canadian monopolies might play in this.
Thank you. And, you know, I think the main point on this is, yes, so we only have 5% of patents in universities commercialized. That's a low number. And when we talked about where the best practices are that when we've had businesses engaged with universities, with polytechnics, with colleges, we've seen a large, sharp increase in terms of commercialization of that IP. And where I speak on two fronts is, one, we need to ensure in legislation that when we're giving public dollars for public research, that we need to make sure that the best intent possible is there to commercialize that IP. But the second side of it is we really, on my third recommendation, we really need to bust what I call Canada's monopoly problem. And specifically, that's in our financial services and our banking sector, that's in our telecommunications sector, and certainly our digital economies. So that when we have, and these are the stats, when there are less monopolies, when we have more competition, then there's more R&D and more attempts for commercializing of IP. And the numbers we gave was 0.5% of revenues right now from these these private companies that are monopolies are actually spent in R&D, where in the U.S. it's over 2%. So by ensuring that the third pillar of our strategy is ensuring we bust up monopolies in Canada in telecoms and financial services and digital services, we are in effect ensuring that R&D goes up. But the second side of it is we need to make sure that the institutions are engaging with businesses. If it in legislation that there has to be an attempt for commercialization, we will then see businesses engaged with these institutions. And as we've seen in Niagara College, for instance, who's done it almost the best of all colleges in Canada, we're going to see a sharp engagement with R&D, and we're going to see a sharp commercialization of IP.
You're correct. We also have a large college in my area, and they're doing wonders with innovations. And But I noticed that the motion mentions universities and not colleges or polytechnics. Do you think that these other schools can play a role in IP? As well, you mentioned the research funding. And what do you think of the follow-up process we do on the research it produces, and how does it compare to the other countries? And is there anything that we can learn from it, and is there room for improvement?
Well, certainly all of that. And yes, I would make that amendment. That should be in there. You know, the reason I put universities is that they do receive about 97% of all the funding. Colleges, when we found our last study, only receive between 2.5 and 3% of all research funding, even though they outperform universities with commercialization. So polytechnics and colleges, I think the recommendation from the IP commercialization study was to increase research funding because they seem to be better at commercializing IP. I would make sure that this is also part of the recommendation that when we're increasing or seeing that same funding, let's make sure that colleges and polytechnics are getting an increase of funding, because when, and I think that this recommendation would affect do that if in legislation there is an effect to make sure that we see an attempt for commercialization through public dollars, that you're going to see colleges outperform universities anyways. And if there's a recoil or next budget, I think you're going to see that they're going to get more funding because they actually do that commercialization.
I'll make it a quick one then. I'm aware this committee undertook a study on IP commercialization last Parliament, and so I was wondering if you think the state of Canadian IP has improved at all since this last study.
No, it's gotten worse.
39 seconds.
Okay, and what are the risks of Canada's digital data being hosted on U.S. services?
Well, they are. 80% of Canadians' data is hosted on U.S. servers who are located in Toronto and Montreal. These servers are here in Canada, and then they're under U.S. jurisdiction, meaning a U.S. court can actually go after our data, Canadians' data in Canada. It's very concerning.
It's just a few seconds left, so 7-8 seconds. Okay, so we will now proceed. We will close this panel with MP Jessic for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Johnson, you described how you purchased a Quebec company in order to expand your business and obviously take a good idea, a good product that was coming out of that company. I believe that you were part of the Mars innovation strategy. Could you just describe how that worked for you and if it made a difference going through Mars to connect all the dots to make your product?
It absolutely did make a difference. And I want to start just saying I fully agree with what Mr. Williams and what Ms. Reynolds said. They're doing a lot to try to create the right playing field. And what I focus on is how do we put a winning team on that playing field. So we work to play to strengths. So one of the things Mars did, we developed an innovative technology with a different type of energy storage system that's very well suited for certain applications. And it's not a one-size-fits-all. It was well designed for the application. The problem is when you want the City of Toronto to buy this, there's no one else they can bid against. They can't go out and get 3 quotes, for example. So they haven't got the ability to come to us. But what Mars did, which was really innovative, is they worked with the council in Toronto, and they got a motion passed that allowed them to purchase a technology, a green tech technology, provided that the Mars group vetted it and also that it is in fact helping drive towards their zero emission strategy for 2040. So point being, they did a really good job of helping stick handle the public procurement process, which was very instrumental in allowing us to get our product out in the field and then also have it as a proving ground to show other jurisdictions within Canada and elsewhere.
Thank you. Ms. Reynolds, you also mentioned the Canada Innovation Corporation, which was proposed by our government a couple of years ago. How do you see that corporation assisting Mars, or is it sort of going to be a giant Mars innovation? Is it going to be different? Will it improve the process, in your view?
Well, I'm not sure of the very specifics in terms of the design and the plan, but I think the opportunity is here to have some degree of coordination that is required, and whether or not it comes through this particular agency or if there's some other way, it's hard for all the organizations who work in this space to self-organize. We've been making attempts, as an example, and I know others as well, of building collaborations and partnerships. But I think if there was a single one that was maybe, quite aligned to these national areas of interest, right? We hear very clearly the government is working towards, we'll call it like that, whether it be through the major projects office, but just clear domains where we want to be able to succeed. Having some sense of coordination just helps all the different organizations on the ground who are working directly with entrepreneurs and founders and scientists to be able to align their efforts.
Are there specific areas in your view where Canada has real opportunity in terms of areas of research that are particularly standout, that potentially could be globally of interest? Do we have strengths here in Canada through your years at Mars that you've observed that could be commercialized and become a major trading opportunity?
Perhaps I'll speak to one area, which relates to the origin of Mars, but it is around the life sciences sector, which is very broad, whether it be digital health, whether it's medical technology devices, whether or not it's biotech as well. There is a great talent, and of course, I'm speaking because we are located in Toronto's Discovery District, which is among the leading and globally with respect to the University of Toronto and all the academic health science centers. There's a real opportunity, but it's actually assembling then all the pieces to coordinate. It's a perfect example if we're talking about commercialization then, how best to be able to get these researchers with the right types of kind of support and training to help them develop all of their activity into business. I think the fact that we haven't been able to I guess move as quickly on this kind of reflects what you were asking about earlier. Then what could a larger agency do? It helps coordinate, and my reference to self-coordinating on the ground between organizations. That's in fact we made an announcement this morning that we're going to organize around a new partnership called Life Sciences Central to do that very thing, to help founders be able to better navigate all these supports and to be much more of a storefront then for investors to come in and find these technologies. Thank you.
This panel comes to an end, and I really want to thank all the witnesses for coming today, taking out the time and providing the important testimony for this study. So I will suspend the meeting for a few minutes so that we can have the witnesses for the next panel. Thank you. The meeting is suspended. our second panel for today's meeting. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the new witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For this panel, we are joined by video conference, Ms. Molly Scheuchert, professor from University of Toronto. And we are also joined by Dr. Mark Nentel, Vice President, Research, Innovation, and Strategic Enterprises from Niagara College. And our third witness for this panel is Robert Esselin, Chief Executive Officer from U15 Canada. So all the witnesses will have 5 minutes for their opening remarks, and then we will proceed to the round of questioning by the MPs. So we will start with Ms. Scheuchert. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee, for giving me the opportunity to meet with you today. I am a professor at the University of Toronto and thoroughly engaged in translational research that is turning our inventions into innovations. I'm pleased to provide the perspectives of both a professor doing cutting-edge research and an entrepreneur. At the University of Toronto, I lead a biomedical engineering lab of 25 researchers, including undergraduate and graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, research associates, and technicians. All of us are working at the intersection of engineering and medicine. My lab is funded from my diversity of sources, NSERC, CIHR, Stem Cell Network, NFRFT programs, philanthropy, and recently the U.S. Department of Defense. While we have had some funding from industry, most support comes from the federal and provincial sources because almost all pharmaceutical companies in Canada do not do R&D here. I have co-founded 5 startup companies based on inventions from my lab. I will highlight 3 of them. Amicathera is pioneering a long-acting product for post-surgical pain, thereby tackling the opioid crisis. We have raised $17 million with our first investors in the U.S., having a staff of 10 FTEs, and we are engaged in a series of strategic partnerships with multinational companies, none of which have R&D in Canada. Senecas is creating a hydrogel to treat blindness. We're supported by $1.4 million from a U.S.-based company in non-dilutive funding and have raised $1.7 million in grant funding. Chase Biotherapeutics is developing a new protein therapy for stroke and spinal cord injury with $1.5 million in commercialization grants. I served as Ontario's chief scientist and sat on the Federal Science, Technology, and Innovation Council for 6 years. My message is simple. Location matters. To enhance private sector R&D investment, we need to encourage multinationals to be here. But we don't want their sales and marketing teams, we want their research teams. Researchers speak the same language, industry R&D follows the talent, but competition is fierce. So how can we convince multinationals that Canada is the best place for investment? We can invite them into our leading research institutions, showing them world-class collaborative scientists. This is what we are doing at the Precision Medicine Initiative that I lead at the University of Toronto. With intentional leadership and greater investment, we can continue to expand Canada's global footprint. Another path is through our small and medium-sized enterprises. Multinationals often stay in Canada when they acquire a Canadian SME. Amgen's Burnaby site began that way. The $2.4 billion acquisition of Fusion by AstraZeneca is a powerful example. Canadian R&D and jobs stayed in Ontario. And when early investors, including provincial funders like Facet and the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, recycle their gains into the next generation of innovators, we grow homegrown champions. Greater investment from the Canadian pension funds to invest in Canada's early stage companies would provide capital that is desperately needed. From my experience, most Canadian companies are chronically underfunded, which means it takes us longer to get to the finish line. And since time is critical to ultimate success, this is a fatal flaw in our funding system. Policy tools can strengthen this ecosystem. Targeted tax incentives for biotech and health tech investors, expanded public capital for early stage companies from seed to Series B, programs to bring experienced Canadians home, and subsidies that help large firms base R&D here and support small firms to grow. Talent is the foundation. For every PhD hired, 9 other jobs are typically created. Encouraging private sector R&D hiring amplifies innovation throughout the economy. In summary, location matters. We must attract multinational R&D to Canada, create opportunities for multinational R&D teams to meet our star researchers, and invest in SMEs so that today's small innovators become tomorrow's global champions. Thank you.
We will now proceed to Dr. Nentel. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the committee for undertaking this study and inviting me as a witness. I'm Vice President of Research, Innovation and Enterprise at Niagara College. J'ai de l'expérience en recherche au niveau universitaire.
I have experience in research at the university and college level. I was a physics professor for 10 years at the University of Toronto and work at Niagara College since 2011, where I direct the Research and Innovation Division.
Quote, innovation emerging from research at Canadian universities. Now, colleges, polytechnics, and CEGEPs, as we heard from the previous hour, across the country also contribute to research endeavor and with the express goal of economic development and job creation. We do this by working with Canadian companies on the development and commercialization of new products, processes, and services. If you want faster commercialization, IP remaining in Canada, sovereignty of our ideas, you should fund applied researchers at colleges. Colleges across Canada operate within 50 kilometers of 95% of the Canadian population and 85% of Indigenous people. Colleges are everywhere people and businesses are. We are a place-based institution, having local impact. Our graduates are the backbone of industry. For every PhD or engineer in a company, there are many more tradespeople, technicians, and technologists who support them, as Professor Shortcut mentioned. Our research specifically, colleges have 500 research centers and labs across the country, have worked with nearly 9,000 partners on more than 8,500 applied research projects last year alone, resulting in close to 9,000 prototypes, products, processes, and services to commercialize. 95% of these projects were with Canadian firms, and 80% were completed within 1 year. There's a one-to-one match between the dollars that the government invests and the company invests into these projects. Now, crucially, the intellectual property developed through these projects is transferred directly to the partner in order to speed up adoption and commercialization right here in Canada. There's no complicated technology transfer process or lengthy licensing negotiations. Now, also, to me, one of the best ways to transfer technology is to hire the brain that solve the problem. So more than 28,000 college students who work on research projects every year go to become part of growing Canadian companies, making them more innovative and competitive on the global market. Au Collège Niagara, nous effectuons de la recherche appliquée avec l'industrie.
At Niagara College, we've been doing funded applied research with industry for 25 years. We focus on projects in sectors of importance for the Niagara region: advanced manufacturing, agriculture and the environment, food and beverages, healthy aging, and commercialization.
Projects with 166 industry partners and 2,250 students. These are for individual projects. But colleges can also amplify and do bigger things for the Canadian economy and do it very efficiently. Niagara College is a creator and leader of the Southern Ontario Network for Advanced Manufacturing Innovation, or SONAMI, which brings together 9 colleges and 2 universities. SONAMI has been mostly funded through FedDev, Ontario, and also through NSERC and for commercialization with Intellectual Property Ontario, or IPON. In its 9+ years of existence so far, Tsunami has undertaken more than 563 projects with 479 manufacturers who commercialize 273 products. Now, if you do the math, that's 48% of projects with already commercialized outcomes. But some of these projects are still ongoing or not even commissioned yet. So the actual percentage is much higher. These projects also created or maintained more than 873 jobs. That's more than 1.5 jobs per project, or less than $27,000 of federal government investment per high-paying manufacturing sector jobs. Now, these again, some projects are not quite finished or even fully started, so the numbers is even better. So despite these contributions, colleges still receive less than 4% of Tri-Council federal research funding annually, which is why I support CICAN's request in its 2025 pre-budget submission to provide $485 million over 5 years for the NSERC College and Community Innovation Program and reach a yearly baseline funding of $215 million by 2030, which would still only bring it to about 5.5% of Tri-Council funding. En conclusion, le Canada doit s'assurer.
In closing, Canada must ensure that federal research investments lead to concrete, real impact that support economic prosperity for all and respond to the biggest challenges we face as a country.
Thrive, grow, and innovate in Canada. College applied research is efficient and leads to on-the-ground economic impacts such as building homes better and faster, strengthening our military and defense capabilities, including dual-use technologies, boosting energy.
Sorry for interrupting, Dr. Natal. If you can just wind up in next 5-6 seconds.
Yep, increasing AI adoption and getting major projects done. If we want fast commercialization in Canada, fund college applied research, please. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And with that, now we will go to Mr. Esselin from U15 Canada. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Canada's challenge is not that we lack ideas or scientific excellence. It's that we haven't yet built a mechanism to translate our research strength into sustained private sector innovation and industrial growth. The question before this committee, how to promote and grow private sector investment in R&D, goes to the heart of Canada's long-standing productivity problem. Our leading research universities are among the best in the world. They produce world-class discoveries and train the next generation of scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurs. But too often, those discoveries are commercialized elsewhere because we lack a coherent national strategy linking discovery to deployment. Let me offer a few facts to frame this discussion. Canada invests just 1.81% of GDP in R&D, well below the OECD average of 2.7%. Business R&D intensity sits at 1.1% of GDP, the second lowest in the G7. Meanwhile, higher education accounts for over a third of all R&D performed in this country, twice the OECD average, and most of it is financed by universities themselves. In other words, our innovation economy rests disproportionately on our research universities without a parallel industrial base to absorb and scale their outputs. This imbalance shows up in firm behavior. Between 2014 and 2022, the number of firms conducting in-house R&D fell by 4%, with deep declines in key sectors like manufacturing, agriculture, and energy. Today, it is just 0.4% of Canadian firms, those with 500 or more employees, that conduct half of all business R&D, while small firms, which make up 86% of our economy, perform only 10%. At the same time, foreign-controlled companies now perform 37% of all business R&D in Canada, investing nearly 9 times more per firm than Canadian-owned companies. That growing reliance on foreign innovation investment underscores the urgency of building our own domestic innovation capacity. Between 2020 and 2022, nearly 1 in 5 Canadian businesses collaborated with post-secondary education on research. U15 universities conducted 3/4 of all industry-sponsored research in Canada, $880 million annually, involving thousands of industry's partners. Science policy is industrial policy. In the 21st century, economic power will depend on a country's capacity to innovate, adopt, and scale new technologies at speed. That requires a single coherent architecture, one that connects discovery, innovation, and deployment. So, what should we do? Premièrement, le Canada doit se doter d'un fonds souverain pour les...
First, Canada needs a sovereign technologies fund, a focused, mission-driven instrument for areas that underpin both our economic and national security. Secondly, we need to rely on talent. Innovation begins with people. Canada ranks 25th among OECD countries in the share of adults with graduate degrees. We cannot lead in science and technology if we cannot attract and retain the best researchers. Exempting graduate students from the study permit cap and accelerating visa processing would send a powerful signal that Canada remains open to top global talent. Third, it is time to bring in a modern science and technology architecture that connects research excellence to national objectives. Defense innovation is a prime example. As Canada rebuilds its defense industrial base, we have a generational opportunity to anchor a new model of mission-oriented research, linking universities, industry, and government in areas such as cybersecurity, AI, and advanced materials. Initiatives like Borealis, which could mobilize university research capacity to strengthen Canada's defense and security ecosystem, illustrate how this can work in practice. In conclusion, allow me to be clear. Our universities are ready partners in this effort. We are the foundation and not the end point of innovation. Every year, we collaborate with thousands of companies, launch hundreds of startups, and train the highly qualified people who drive innovation across every sector. But to close the gap between discovery and deployment, Canada must now match its research strength with industrial ambition and a modern innovation ecosystem in keeping with its aspirations. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
And we will start our first round of 6 minutes each with MP Ho. MP Ho, please go ahead. You will have 6 minutes.
Hi. My first question is for Mr. Astley. Canada is home to some of the leading universities in the country, in the world. You're head of the U15, so you see that firsthand. We have some of the best researchers. We have a lot of taxpayer-funded money going into research. But it seems like there's all the breakthroughs we're making, and according to a statistic, that there's 50% of all publicly funded intellectual property is ultimately going to be assigned to foreign firms. Do you see an issue with that? Is this a failure of this Liberal government on its industrial policy?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. It's a failure of our innovation ecosystem, and what I describe in my remarks as a science technology architecture that is not adapted to the modern world. So think about innovation as a continuum. You start with talent, people, research, commercialization, and at the end, you need someone who buy the services or the product, right? We've been good at focusing at the beginning. As you say, we have leading research universities, but we have let the middle in the end a bit on its own, hoping that innovation will just happen on its own. And when you see with other countries is they have been more intentional at focusing public policy in the middle and the end point.
And, we see after 10 years of this Liberal government, we have the fastest shrinking economy in Canada of the G7. After adjusting for inflation and adjusted for on a per capita basis, we see investment fleeing at a record level, a level that we've never seen before, ever since this Prime Minister took office. Does this concern you? Does this concern you from your perspective, as it relates to the research ecosystem?
The trajectory of productivity in Canada has been a long-standing problem, to be honest. It has been over the last 30 years, and certainly since the great financial crisis of 2008 has been stagnant, and this is why we're not have sustained growth in this country. And business R&D is at the core of this. If we don't solve this problem, if we don't scale our SMEs, and if we don't have businesses investing capital in the economy,
Aren't investing capital in the economy.
there are two main problems in my view, and I've wrote a paper on this before I was at U15 called Engines of Growth. One is industrial composition that is too tilted vis-a-vis consumption and not enough vis-a-vis production. Our economy relies too much on real estate and not enough on people who are producing things and services. And second is the lack of scale. Per capita, we have 3 times less large firms in Canada than in the U.S. And so by definition, SMEs will have a harder time. It's not their fault. It's just they're smaller, invest R&D in the economy, right? So we need, as a public policy objective, to scale our companies, our domestic companies, so that they can invest their dollars in the economy, in R&D, for example.
System or the amount of government red tape play a factor in that?
I would agree with that, Madam Chair, that we have not created an environment that is conducive to capital formation, and regulatory framework is very heavy right now. I think it has been recognized by a lot of policymakers and is not conducive to people investing in the economy. I think it is true for energy in general projects, but it's true also across the board. It's not easy. We're not making it easy for people who want to invest capital in the economy.
If the government got out of the way and the taxes weren't so high, that could help spur innovation.
There are many factors that can steer innovation. Building a more science, a more fulsome science technology architecture, one that translates ideas into corporate outcomes, economic outcomes, is an important one. But yes, tax incentives, regulatory framework are also important.
And you're seeing an absence in the ecosystem of a sort of a national framework that coordinates the research, the talent, and the capital, right?
I want to underscore, Madam Chair, this is not easy. The countries who have done this well, the United States, Israel, South Korea, Netherlands.
Israel and Netherlands are much smaller than Canada.
Yeah,
so
they're much smaller, but they're much more
smaller
sophisticated,
markets.
would
But
be
they're
my
still
point.
able to do it. So,
yeah.
So it's possible that we can do it too, right?
We absolutely have all the tools and the possibilities to make this work, but we haven't connected the dots together. Right. And so we keep treating these things as siloed, right? And I would also argue, Madam Chair, that our innovation programs, I think there's 192 of them, are not yielding the result that they should. We should invest better as opposed to just investing more, you know?
Absolutely, to get some value for taxpayer money and 192 programs, that seems like a lot of bureaucracy. Do you think there are any national security risks present in the research ecosystem right now to foreign threats?
Great question, Madam Chair. I'm glad the question was asked. Since the last 4 years at the U15 level, there's a working group on research security that I co-chair with the Government of Canada officials from ICED. Each of our institutions has a research security architecture. In other words, people responsible for research security inside our institutions that proactively flag.
And those vulnerabilities have gotten worse, right, in the last 10 years, you think?
I would say that, to the contrary, from our U15 perspective, the research security architecture has been much more robust and has enabled us to, have better outcomes on that.
Thank you. Time is up. We will now proceed to MP McAlvey for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first questions are for Dr. Nantel. I'm more familiar with collaborative R&D with universities, and in those cases, the overhead on a research grant provided could be in the 25 to 40% range. So it is quite high. It is a big bar for participation. I'm wondering, in the colleges, how does that work in terms of overhead that is delivered to the colleges? But also, can you speak to the advantages you have around IP? I know in most of the cases working with universities, we'd always put in that we have non-exclusive rights to use or reproduce the intellectual property for for non-commercial purposes oftentimes so that you can work with that lower overhead. So how does it work with you in IP? So again, sorry, I know I put a lot in there. So IP and overhead being the two things.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm familiar with the university way of dealing with overhead because I did research at U of T for 10 years. The colleges don't get any money from overhead on research projects. We every dollar that the government puts through Niagara College to invest in research is matched at least 1-to-1 by industry in a mix of cash and in kind. I always require at least 20% cash to make sure that the companies are serious and can commercialize the products of the research after the fact. But none of that comes to support our research offices. It goes to the project itself. In fact, the situation of funding of Office of Research at colleges is pretty dire. We do not have access to the Research Support Fund in any serious way. Last week, on Wednesday, $482 million was distributed through the Research Support Fund, and colleges got 2.5 or 0.5% of that through a little bit of projects through the SHRC probably. It's a problem because supporting our research office is a bit difficult. We, as a university professor, I had to recruit my students, write my grants, manage my projects and all this because, you know, you can do as much research as your spouse will let you. In colleges, the profs are hired to teach. And if we want them to do research, we have to actually release them from teaching. So we don't want them managing projects, writing grants, recruiting students, and all that. So it's done by the research office. We recruit the industry partner. We make sure that they put their cash in kind in. So there's something that we could do to help the research office be better supported, but we're not doing it through overhead because we want the companies to come. And they're usually SMEs. So they don't have a whole lot of money to spend to support the research office. That's the first question, I think. The second is the advantages of IP. At the end of the projects, all IP through Niagara College for sure, but all colleges in Canada goes to the company for them to commercialize as soon as possible. We retain the right to use the IP for education and further research purposes as long as it doesn't stop the company from commercializing and being competitive on the market, but we do not keep the IP. It's not what we do. What we do is train people and do economic development and job creation as much as possible.
And do you have any data around when you bring these companies in, are they more likely to hire your students and to hire and to give them placements after? Like, is that part of the discussion that does happen through your offices of research with the companies while they're retaining they're retaining the IP? Is the thought that it's very much encouraged or maybe required, which would be nice too, that as you expand or grow, you are hiring students out of the colleges that they work with?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Yes, a lot of our graduates who have worked on a research project do get hired by the company who takes the IP and commercialize it. Because if they commercialize the IP, they all of a sudden need to adopt it and develop it further, and then make sure that it's actually available for sale, or if it's a process they adapt into their production, that somebody is there to implement it. So a lot of times the students gets hired. Like I say, the best way to transfer technology from academia to industry is to hire the brain what solved the problem. And that's one of the biggest way in which we do that. Because we work with local companies and often with local students, it's natural for them to remain in the area and be hired in the area and do economic development in the area.
You mentioned a very small proportion of the funds from NSERC and others flow to universities. Flow to colleges. Thank you. How are you able to collaborate with university researchers? So while the university researchers may be receiving the majority of the funds, how is that pathway for collaboration between the colleges and the university, and what can we do to improve that better?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. There are not many ways in which to do that that are institutionalized through grant opportunities. We do it because universities often have several colleges around them. There's a college in most of your writings, not a university necessarily. For example, the example I gave of Tsunami, we have 9 colleges but 2 universities, Queen's and McMaster, and we work with them on projects. A lot of them are collaborative. Some of them are not because it's just they work on their own projects. But at the end of the day, it's a question of aligning what the goals are. Universities sometimes work on the longer time frame of the PhD or the master's, and the actual outcomes that generate recognition at university is different from the outcomes that generate recognition at colleges. Papers, startup companies, intellectual property retained is all very good stuff. In our case, it's students graduating and products commercialized and jobs created. So if we can align the Profs Lab with the college's mission, it works really well. And it has for these 2 labs with which we work at Tsunami.
How am I for time? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonca for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les témoins.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank the witnesses. Mr. Nantel, welcome back to the committee. You already mentioned that colleges and CEGEPs and the technology transfer centers only get about 2.9% of the subsidized organizations and 4% of the total federal funding. However, the applied research that they do represents more than 10% of partnerships and research contracts in Canada. And the government really claim that it should support, that it supports our research in a balanced way. Thank you for the question. And through you, Madam Chair, research at the college level is something recent. It's been about 25 years that Niagara College has been doing subsidized research in collaboration with industry. A lot of colleges have been doing so for 20 years or less. So I understand that there's a catch-up that needs to be done in that regard. And I don't want to focus too much on the past, but more on the future. And starting from now, how we can do better. It's normal that universities that have existed for 1,000 years do this kind of research and have the lion's share. But it would be possible, in my opinion, to increase what's being done. And a substantial part of it in 2024, I believe it is, there was an injection of $109 million over 3 years on the NSERC program to assist colleges. And this injection is about to end in 2026. It'll be the end of that cash injection. So the NSERC budget for the colleges will go down by 30 million or 40%. So I'm asking the committee, please, to recommend that this injection be carried forward and made permanent. And as I mentioned in my comments, that we should support the application of CEACAN Colleges and Institutes Canada to provide colleges with 485 million over 5 years for the NSERC program, and to have a basic funding of 250 million per year between now and 2030. And even that would only bring us up to 5.5%. Ottawa often repeats that the private sector will fill the gap, but 3% of the applied research funding goes to the colleges and technology transfer centers. Can the private sector offset such a commitment? Thank you for the question. Through you, Madam Chair. Everybody is doing their share, in my opinion. We're asking the industry and the companies to match on a one-to-one basis, which helps us a bit. But when we also ask them for cash funding in order to stretch forward the government investments, it helps. When we stretch it like that, it doesn't subsidize our research office. It subsidizes the project itself. So the support to the research office itself is more inside baseball in a way. There's more that can be done. The industry, if you want to talk about increasing the bird, the colleges help with a one-to-one matching. We help with that. But the more the government supports applied research in the colleges, the more the bird will go up and the companies will be involved in research. And it's not as if after having invented a new process, it seems to me that if they'll get someone to bring in, the company comes to see me and they want it. They want to commercialize it. Mr. Nantel, I'd like to continue the questioning. The colleges and technology transfer centers measure their success based on jobs created, patents, and other outputs. However, only academic criteria are used, quotes, and doesn't that prevent them from really recognizing the college's contribution to economic development? Indeed. There's a question of fairness for the colleges. We have a program that is quite small at NSERC where things that are recognized are those that can be delivered by the colleges. But when you try to apply for subsidies for NSERC outside of our dedicated college program, we cannot really measure up to the University of Toronto or other comparable institutions because the selection criteria are built based on universities and not colleges. So it's important to have a portfolio of investment for Canada. The universities are very important and the research they do is very important, but we also need to have investment in projects that are going to produce outcomes right away or within a year. And that's where that part of the portfolio is in the hands of the colleges. Thank you. Continuing along, concerning the rigorousness of the college model and the technology transfer centers, you mentioned that you require a one-to-one matching from the private sector to ensure their commitment, which is focused on the in the field reality. If Ottawa increases its own share of the funding, would we not see an immediate duplication effect of job production and productivity? Absolutely. Through you, Madam Chair, we do not want to reduce our one-to-one matching just because there's more funding. We will do more projects and create more economic development and more jobs. And there will be more of our students who will get involved in projects. And when they graduate, they're more innovative when they enter the companies.
With MP Baldinelli for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us this afternoon. Quite an interesting conversation and an area to look into. Mr. Nantel, thank you for being here this afternoon and always responding to the calls from this committee to appear and to provide your insights. A little bit you don't, I think, take the opportunity to brag a little bit, but Niagara College is the #1 research college in all of Canada, and we're proud of that fact. And thank you for your work, and my understanding is you'll be retiring sometime in the spring, and that will be a tremendous loss to us. But, you know, building on what my colleague, Ms. McKelvey, had talked about earlier with regards to how colleges are able to undertake that applied research on the ground, taking those only 4% of Tri-Council funding and actually getting it directly into the work that you're doing with local companies on the ground. And you talked about the notion of research centers. And can you talk a little bit about the ecosystem, that how it's created on a college system that allows for the commercialization to happen more frequently, I would suggest, at the college level than it does at the university level?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I mean, the question is, what are the motivations? And again, the evaluation of what happens at the college system. In our case, we are place-based institutions. We're here to help the local economy. And so we base our innovation centers or our research centers in the subjects that make sense for our region. Now, our Food and Beverage Innovation Center, for example, does food innovation, beverage innovation, including alcoholic, including cannabis infused. So we have projects from across Canada because we're a very specialized center. We have our own winery, our own distillery, and our own brewery, so we can do a whole bunch of things. But really, it's about what's going on in the region, mostly. And we respond to industry. When I was a professor at university, I had ideas, and I pursued my ideas, and I was great. I was convincing NSERC and CFI and these other agencies that my ideas were fun, and they would fund me, and it was great. In this particular case, they're not my ideas, they're industry's ideas. They want to solve a problem, or they want to create a new product, service, or process, and they come to us. So instead of trying to find a company that may want to buy our outcomes from my ideas. Here it's more, we build the team around the company's idea, around the company's program. We put the right experts, the right students, the right equipment and labs to solve the actual solution, the problem for the company. And so it's a different direction from which we attack the problem of solving industry's problems.
Thank you. Mr. Aslan, you had recently spoke to the Standing Committee on Industry and Technology, and you referenced a quote that I pulled, and it was from former Google CEO Eric Schmidt. Innovation power, the ability to invent and integrate technologies at scale, is now the foundation of both prosperity and security. And this summer, you spoke to the National Post, and you stated Canada has a very competitive research sector that lacks the bridges to translate the ideas to the Canadian private sector. So no pressure. It's the notion of how we create those bridges. How do we create that that power, that innovation power in Canada? You had talked about your 3 suggestions. You know, retaining talent being the second one. Right now, Canada being ranking 25th in the OECD in retaining talent and recruiting. But are we also, because of the lack of IP commercialization in Canada, losing talent as well? And that would be a drain as well.
Yeah, I'll try to be very concrete with this question. We have, as I said in my remarks, I believe a generational opportunity with defense spending to do industrial policy correctly, link research with industrial outcome, and work at all the phases of the innovation continuum. I would hope, for example, that we would use Borealis, this science office that has been created inside the Department of Defense, to do public procurement that would allow the Canadian government, in essence, to be a buyer of Canadian technology that would have been developed in research intensive universities such as U15 universities. That would be a great example of how we could change kind of the bad framework that we've had where we leak our IP, to your point, to other countries or other companies outside Canada. And so I think we have to be much more intentional. I will also cite the example of Netherlands.
I will interrupt.
Okay, sorry.
Time is up for Mr. Baldinelli. So we will now proceed to MP Rana for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much to all the witnesses for your valuable time. I will start with you, Mr. Aslan. You already responded to one of our questions asked by our colleague that these issues are not the recent one. These are lying over the last almost 30 years. So our government is here to tackle all those issues right now. Let me mention about an interview, your interview in 2025 with the Research Money. You mentioned that priorities such as establishing a sovereign technologies fund and modernizing Canada's science and technology architecture. Which research areas or emerging technologies do you believe hold the greatest promise for commercialization in Canada?
Great question, Madam Chair. So Canada has comparative advantage over key research areas, I would say, and I don't mean to exclude anyone specifically, but there are obvious ones. In the U15, seriously, quantum is one where Canada has a national advantage on the research side. AI obviously is well documented. I will just also take a moment to say that this dichotomy that we're trying to make between applied research and fundamental sometimes is flawed. I will remind this committee respectfully that AI was created through fundamental research. Jeff Hinton at U of T did what was a big reason for that, and it was through fundamental research. So it's not as clear-cut as people would want to say. Both are important. And then I would say on energy technology, we have great advantage. This country has obviously a lot of natural resources. If you look at the industrial policy that Peter Lougheed did in Alberta with the oil sands in the 60s, that has led to enormous wealth for this country. It was through research and government directing research on these types of technologies.
And as you are involved with the U15, do you think universities and the colleges, they get the equal opportunities in research? and also the funding?
I would just say again, respectfully, Madam Chair, that is different. Not all IP is equal. Some IP is really, really important in certain sectors related, for example, for semiconductors development. It's really high-end technological innovation. And some is kind of important but more marginal, kind of down the road in day-to-day innovation that is also really important. I don't want to minimize any contribution, but it's just at the different scale, at different levels. And I think people have to get a better appreciation of those differences.
And how we can get more private companies to invest in R&D? Any idea?
I mean, that's the billion-dollar question, Madam Chair. Again, as long as we're not going to have more larger companies in Canada, large firms, R&D will become problematic at the private level. And I would say if we don't have certain scale in certain sectors where innovation is important, advanced manufacturing, ag tech, biotech, energy tech, it will be hard again to drive private R&D. So industrial composition is really important.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Mark, from your perspective at Niagara College, how would you assess Canada's current position in research commercialization compared to other leading countries in the world?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Madam Chair. Well, I read the same report that you do, where it's been several decades now that we've actually funded research pretty well in Canada in general. And it's been kind of harder to get the business investment in research and development to follow on and the commercialization to happen. And I completely agree with my colleague Robert Asselin here about how the intellectual property is really a broad definition, and that that's why I mentioned earlier a portfolio approach in Canada's investment in research and commercialization. You have to continue funding universities to take the longer shots, the more potentially transformative shots that give you AI, that give you cancer cures and things like that. At the same time, in your investment portfolio, you have things that come due sooner. That would give a little bit of a win every other week or every other month. And that's what colleges can complementarily supply for the economy. And so I completely agree that we can do better in general. I think that given how little funding colleges get for doing their bits, we can do better there, for sure.
And do you think, are there any obstacles? Oh, thank you.
We will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonca for 2.5 minutes.
Monsieur Nantel, vous disiez que les collèges ne gardent pas la...
Mr. Nantel, you say that colleges don't keep IP with private sector collaborations and that the companies don't always have the means to build value from it. If Ottawa did a better job of financing applied research, could we have better outputs for our SMEs? Thank you for the question through you, Madam Chair. Yes, absolutely. There are many ways that we work with companies and SMEs where the federal government assists through their IRAP program, for example. Often the companies receive investment to assist them in doing research, and often they will go out to CEGEPs and technology transfer or other organizations. And if we want to increase the subsidy, the funding of the IRAP program would assist the industry in investing with these funds, because when we work with IRAP, it's not 100% from the government. There's a certain amount that comes from the company, and that's the same thing for us. So if there was more investment in applied research at the colleges as well as through agencies such as IRAP, it would certainly assist more in boosting, that's a good Francophone term, boosting production for research companies. Thank you. Right now, colleges and the CEGEPs and the centers support jobs and training, and it's exactly the priorities of the federal government. So wouldn't it be simply consistent for Ottawa to fund those organizations at the level due to their organizations? It's hard to argue against that opinion. Yes, indeed, it would be logical to do so. Anything else important that you'd like to put on the record that we should not go without hearing? I think the college has research centers, there are more than 500 in Canada, and they are very diversified. They range from maritime technology to AI. So there's really a wide range to be covered in all in important sectors for the local economies and sometimes at the provincial or even national level. So I believe that there's a lot to look at more attentively. The CCTIs and the Centers for Access to Technology throughout the country could be better subsidized too, because they also enable companies to do fee-for-service projects. In other words, technical services or custom services when they're really in a hurry. So I think it can be done.
With MPD Ryder for 3 minutes and then MP McKelvey for 3 minutes. So MP D. Ryder, please go ahead. You will have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Dr. Nantel, I'm part of the college ecosystem myself, a graduate of mechanical engineering, specializing in robotics and automation. I was also a professor at our local college, so I appreciate the positive economic impact that colleges have on our R&D. In your opening remarks today, and you've actually mentioned a couple of times, that the best way to transfer technology from academia to industry is to transfer the brains that solve the problems. The more than 28,000 college students who work on research projects each year go on to become part of the growing Canadian companies. Here's the problem I see. These companies are leaving, not only on monetization, but established companies like Stellantis are leaving our country. So can we realistically expect these talented graduates to find jobs here in Canada and drive innovations if our companies, there's a continued exodus of companies and employers? And is that devastating both our economy and our future job prospects for our students?
For you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. I'd like to think that most of the projects we do are with small, medium corporations that want to grow in Canada. They're not at the point where they leave the country. We do work with startups, but not that many because, to be fair, they don't necessarily have the resources to match our one-to-one requirement. And some of the grant programs to which we apply require that the company be around more than 2 years and have more than 2 full-time employees. So startups sometimes get bought off. Big companies sometimes are branch plants of international companies and sometimes move. Most of the companies with which we work are local companies or companies in Canada that are trying to grow from being 10 employees to being 15 employees or 20 employees or 50 employees. And I have great examples, including Hamel Agricultural Processing Solutions. They were a machine shop that made mostly car parts, but at one point realized there was a need in agriculture to process the growth of microgreens, you know, the alfalfa sprouts and that stuff. And so we've helped them design a whole bunch of equipment to cut the alfalfa sprout, wash the alfalfa sprout, dry the alfalfa sprout, and then sell them. And so now they sell these machines around the world, in the Middle East and elsewhere. And so this is a company that doubled its staff, doubled its manufacturing space in about a year after finishing working with us, and they stayed in Niagara Falls. Right? So there are several examples like this, and they create the jobs for our graduates.
Could they not create more economic impact as well if they could monetize more than the 15, the 20? Small to medium-sized enterprise, absolutely. How do they scale more here in Canada? How can we do better with policy and monetization beyond just the 15 here in Canada and retain those companies in Canada at the same time?
Sorry, your time is up, and maybe
you can provide something in writing.
Yeah, provide it in written response, and we will now proceed to MP McKelvey for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Dr. Choquette. Hopefully I pronounced that properly. Mr. Asselin outlined very eloquently the need to shift the way we do research to a more mission-oriented way so that we can really make progress on kind of these big questions facing society. I guess from your perspective, I was just wondering if you had any recommendations in that regard, but also on ensuring that we continue to strike the right balance between discovery and innovation and commercialization. So I was hoping you could shed some light on your opinions around that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the question and the opportunity to respond. I think the Department of Defense budget and the opportunity to use that as a way to both enhance Canada's security, whether that's health security, food security, cybersecurity, is a great opportunity to transform and take advantage of that opportunity for discovery and intentional research. I completely concur with that balance of investing in the future, which is the inventions that we don't even know about today, so the discovery research, and at the same time being intentional with our innovations. I think this panel is not about colleges versus universities. It's not about liberals or conservatives. It's about Canada. It's about all of us working together to attract investment in R&D, and that is through multinationals, that's through supporting our SMEs, and that's supporting discovery and supporting excellence. Like, nobody cares outside of our little ecosystem whether we're supporting universities or colleges. People care about the big ideas, the excellence, the opportunity to change the world, and that's what we have to do as Canada, have big ambitions to do something grand, not the, moving the chairs on the Titanic.
I may run out of time, so I will put this question to Mr. Asselin. If you have time, maybe you could provide it in writing if you don't finish. But can you speak to some of the structural changes that you think we should be undergoing to be more intentional under these big questions in science and industry that we're facing right now?
For the question, Madam Chair, one that is really important that we've missed the opportunity is to do a Canadian DARPA, a CARPA that was on the table a few years ago and agreed by both parties in both platforms, that for somehow was not materialized. And if you look at what DARPA has done in the U.S., is nothing but exceptional, linking excellence research to commercialization, to public procurement, the full continuum of innovation. And as we think about defense, I would encourage policymakers to really think about this model going forward. And we have a vehicle that is called Borealis that we should use to emulate this model.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists.
Add 15 seconds. With that, this panel comes to an end, and I really want to thank all the three witnesses for taking out the time to appear before the committee. Just one or two quick announcements for the committee members. For next week, November 3rd and 5th, we will continue our study on the private sector investment in research and development in Canada. In regards to the translation of documents received from the agencies, the Translation Bureau is still calculating the word count so they can provide us with an estimation of time. After spending a few days evaluating the text, they realized they will need to call on their colleagues at the department. So they are still not able to give us a deadline, but rest assured that they are doing their best to respond as quickly as possible. And just one last thing which I wanted to find out from the committee members is that for the antimicrobial study, would members like to give drafting instructions or right now, or they would like to wait until we have the summary of evidence from the analyst? The analysts are working on the summary of evidence, and it will be provided to all the members as soon as it is completed. So, Mr. MP Baldwin.
Two things, Madam Chair, and thank you. I prefer summary of evidence first before we do drafting instructions. And secondly, do we have any idea yet on the availability of the science advisor?
Yes. So that is, that is November 26th.
Okay.
So that's confirmed. Okay. So we will wait until we have the summary of evidence from the analyst. They are working on it, and it will be then circulated to the members, and then members can give drafting instruction to the analyst. With that, thanks once again. And is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Meeting is adjourned.